Good evening, and welcome to tonight's book launch of Rudy Wiebe, Essays on His Works. As is the case, with online presentations like this, it's both somewhat incomplete to meet remotely like this and not in person, yet at the same time, a real privilege, nonetheless, to gather from so many different parts of Canada and beyond in ways otherwise not possible. So I'm grateful for this opportunity to meet live with all of you, and particularly with Rudy Wiebe, whose tremendous literary legacy we want to celebrate tonight by marking this publication. Welcome to all. It's been my privilege to work in preparation for tonight with Bianca Lakoseljac, editor of tonight's feature title. Bianca assembled a notable list of contributors for this book, each of them writing essays on a particular title within the Rudy Wiebe canon. I'm grateful that many of these contributors are here tonight from different regions of the country and prepared to offer their reflections. I will introduce each one throughout the evening. And finally, we're pleased, of course, that all of you have joined us from near and far to honor Rudy's literary legacy. We are a large gathering from many locations. I kindly invite you, if you're comfortable, to send a short chat noting your name and general location so we have a sense of who is joining us and from where. My name is Arlen. I'm the director of Common Word. It's a national Anabaptist bookstore and library jointly operated by Canadian Mennonite University and Mennonite Church Canada, where it's possible to buy or borrow or access resources online. Rudy Wiebe, Essays on His Works is available to borrow or buy at commonword.ca for the discounted price of $22.75. It's our privilege to be hosting this conversation. Tonight, I am zooming in from Treaty 1 territory. We acknowledge together that we meet on the sacred ancestral lands of First Nations, Indigenous, and Métis peoples, lands unceded or under treaty. We make this acknowledgement in respect for the host peoples who have for millennia stewarded these bioregions and watersheds and continue to love and care for the land and the waters. We are grateful for them. And we commit ourselves to greater learning and the pursuit of justice that leads to a reconciliation. Rudy Wiebe is an alumnus of Canadian Mennonite University. We have asked Paul Doerksen, Associate Professor of Theology and Anabaptist Studies at CMU, to begin our reflections tonight. Paul regularly teaches courses in which he seeks to draw theology and literature into constructive conversation, including Mennonite literature and theology. One of the books Paul has written is titled Take and Read, reflecting theologically on books. I've invited Paul to speak about Rudy Wiebe's influence on him and his students, and to acknowledge our special institutional connection. Paul.
Thank you very much, Arlen. It's my distinct privilege to be part of this book launch and to talk just for a moment about the impact of Rudy's writing on our work here at Canadian Mennonite University. I think the last time I saw you in person, Rudy, was in 2019 when you came to Winnipeg to CMU to receive our PAX or our Peace Award. It was good to be with you then. Several of us had the good fortune of sharing dinner with Rudy and Tina during that time in 2019 as part of that visit. And during the conversation, the topic of shoes came up, as it does in the book, namely that a number of years ago, when he was to receive a significant award, Rudy bought a very nice pair of shoes. And I couldn't, these became his award shoes. I couldn't help but notice as I looked down that they were starting to become, despite being very stylish and lovely, they were showing signs of being worn a lot. I too own some award shoes, but mine are in pristine condition. One of my prized possessions is a signed hard copy, first edition of Peace Shall Destroy Many, original dust jacket, still intact. I've always loved the fact that those publishers saw fit to promote the novel by describing the author as a young theologian, black lettering on the front, dramatic red lettering on the back. And subsequent editions, of course, changed their approach somewhat. Usually what we've got is a generic prairie scene of one kind or another. But the reason I like this original cover so much, besides its aesthetic appeal, is that I think it's such an accurate description of the author. I've read a lot of what Rudy Wiebe has written, and the high literary quality of his work is, of course, without question. But I think that the theological depth is an important dimension of this work as well that perhaps has not received quite as much attention. That theological work is never pedantic, it's never browbeating, but it's rich and it's deep. And when I teach this these days, Peace Shall Destroy Many, the edition we use is published by Vintage Canada, and it includes an afterword by Rudy, and I just love the concluding paragraph of his afterword. He writes that he decided not to change anything in the book. He just let it stand. And let me quote from the afterword, except for one word. I have deleted a word that the original editors in their wisdom inserted after my last check of the page proof. One small word in a key sentence of the novel that I've pondered since I first saw it in the book in 1962. And he goes on then to explain why he wanted that one word changed. To me, this moment encapsulates at least some of the dynamic that makes Rudy's work so valuable. We're exposed to in his work is a vision of a world, God's world, and our place in it in relation to others, in relation to creation, and so on. And that vision is communicated with such great care that is on display in the attention to single words, and especially in their relation to other words. And it's that theological and literary depth that compels me to return to your work time and again, Rudy, when I teach a course titled Mennonite Literature and Theology. As these things go, when we prepare courses, I assign this poet, that memoir, this theologian, that novel, and then the next iteration of the course, I replace some of them, reuse some of them. But the one constant has been my teaching of Peace Shall Destroy Many, in part because that novel signals so much of what is to come in Rudy's extensive body of work. For example, in the interview with Hugh Cook, included in the book that we're launching, Rudy asserts that every Mennonite novel of mine has characters trying to find genuine Christian ways to live, going on to say that such genuineness is sometimes achieved, but never fully or completely, of course. And later in that same interview included in this book, Rudy extends his observation, claiming that in all my fiction, even where not a single ostensible Christian appears, there lingers an aroma of Tom Weentz's longing at the end of Peace Shall Destroy Many, that Christ's teachings, he's quoting, of course, he's quoting the novel itself, could he but scrape them bare of all their required meanings and see them as those first disciples had done, their feet in the dust of Galilee. Says Rudy in the interview, the longing remains for me as well. And indeed, as John Longhurst's essay in this book shows, when Rudy came to CMU to receive the Pax Award, his response was this: the award is called Pax, peace, noting that when Peace Shall Destroy Many was published, it destroyed peace for many. But because of it, I have never been able to stop writing, not for the rest of my life. And so reading Wiebe's novels sets us on a path of longing, as it were. And even if we don't read more of his work in a given course that I teach, it's not surprising that he and his work come up along the way. This year, for example, last term when I was teaching Jonathan Dick's new graphic novel, Shelter Belts, with my students, we looked at Jonathan's earlier comic that appeared in The Walrus, a comic titled Mennonites Talking About Miriam Taves. Here we're presented in this comic with a number of fictional characters and their opinions, but in the middle of it all, one of the biggest drawings is a clearly identifiable Rudy Wiebe. And the speech bubble says, her books, referring, of course, to Miriam Taves, ask us to be self-critical, to accept reality, and to love better. And of course, that statement is a summary of Wiebe's defense of Miriam's work in a setting movingly described by Taves herself in the essay that's included in this book that we're launching. And so, all along, as my students are exposed to Mennonite literature and theology, we are guided in very significant ways as we seek to read and think about Miriam Taves, about Jonathan's work, and so on. And might I say that Rudy's work is a reliable guide to the reading that we carry on after reading Peace Shall Destroy Many. And so it goes. Rudy Wiebe's sustained work serves us by helping to orient us with its constructive, deeply mature literary and theological vision. And I like to say that his work lingers and has its way with those who have ears to hear. I, for one, am deeply grateful for the way that lingering work has shaped me, shapes my teaching, and by extension, my students, and more broadly, the university community of which I'm a part. There's one thing that Rudy and I share, and that is that our mother tongue is Low German. So if you'll allow me, I want to conclude my reflection by returning to that shared language. Veel dankzij voor jullie zeer fijne arbeid. Dat is ons allen zeer wichtig. Dankzij.
Thank you, Paul. Our next presenter, editor of the book and co-organizer of this event, Bianca Lakoseljac, is a novelist, short story writer, poet, and essayist. Her publications include 2 novels, Stone Woman, that won the 2017 Book Excellence Award, Summer of the Dancing Bear, 2012, a collection of stories, Bridge in the Rain, in 2010, and a book of poetry, Memoirs of a Praying Mantis, in 2009. She holds an MA in English from York University and has taught communications at Humber College and Toronto Metropolitan University. She is past president of the Canadian Authors Association in Toronto and has served as Open Book Toronto Writer in Residence. Bianca is the recipient of the Matthew Ahern Memorial Essay Prize from York University. Rudy Wiebe essays on his works stems from her study and lifelong admiration of Wiebe's writing. It is, of course, this book that we are celebrating tonight, and I've asked her to introduce the subject. Bianca.
None of us are shown. Just remember speaking, right? Everyone else will be put on. You spoken.
Thank you. Thank you, Arlen, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you, Paul, for that wonderful introduction. We're always learning. Sorry, I have a bit of a cold. I was introduced to Wiebe's novel, The Temptations of Big Bear, as a master's student at York University. I took a course, Special Topics, Frog Lake Massacre, 1885. After reading Wiebe's novel, I was hooked on his writing. His engaging yet challenging storytelling drew me in. And my desire for those little-known segments of the Canadian past that seemed buried deep under the mounds of colonial history enticed me to expand my research. I read William Cameron's The War Trail of Big Bear, which Wiebe credits as the source that propelled his drive to continue his research of the Plains Cree chief Big Bear's life. I was drawn in by Cameron's experiences during the Frog Lake Massacre and his time spent in captivity at as Big Bear's prisoner. Cameron expresses his admiration for Big Bear as a leader of the Cree peoples and for his attempts to prevent the Frog Lake uprising. During Big Bear's trial in Regina in 1885, Cameron testified in support of the Cree chief. I read Wiebe's other novels, which had been published by that time, as well as a number of his essays, and during my teaching years over the next couple of decades, continued to follow his writing. I thoroughly enjoyed compiling and editing this anthology. A prelude to the essays is a witty and heartwarming cartoon teaching Rudy to dance, all true events, by the iconic Canadian author Margaret Atwood. Rudy Wiebe's comment that Atwood was trying to teach him to dance attests to this literary thought-provoking article, Peace Shall Destroy Many, which echoes the theme of Wiebe's debut novel by the same title, and interestingly, his ongoing battle to help bring change to the Mennonite community's ways. The next piece, Hildi Froese Tiessen's delightful essay, Between Memory and Longing, Rudy Wiebe's Sweeter Than All the World, is a comprehensive discussion of Wiebe's ninth novel. The essay opens a broad view into Wiebe's Russian Mennonite heritage, which has influenced and permeated his work. It is important to note that although Wiebe has been advocating for change, he has remained devoted to his Mennonite community. The novel is a remarkable odyssey into his heritage, a voyage of self-discovery that follows the story of the Mennonite peoples from their persecution in the 16th century Netherlands to their immigration to Danzig, London, Russia, and the Americas, and eventually to their settlement in Canada. Another essay that presents a window into Wiebe's background as an author is Literary Genealogy, Exploring the Legacy of F.M. Salter by George Melnyk. It offers a perspective into the early development in Canadian literature and the work of Dr. Frederick M. Salter, who mentored Rudy Wiebe. Melnyk's essay also reminds us that in 1939, Professor Salter, who taught English at the University of Alberta, launched a creative writing course, the first in any Canadian university. I am pleased to present my interview with Aretha Van Herk, a renowned author and a professor at the University of Calgary, as it offers a witty and heartwarming glance into her work with Rudy Wiebe, who was her mentor and later her colleague and collaborator on a number of publications. Van Herk's reflection on her earlier work is also an instructive reminder that for aspiring writers that an author's journey is a bumpy one with much compromise and hard work. Scot Morison's informative piece, The Rudy Wiebe Room, leads the reader to get to know Wiebe, not only as an author and an academic, but also as a friend. The essay also includes a photo of Wiebe with author Margaret Atwood, a tribute to their lifelong friendship. Morison, Wiebe's former student, confesses, "We are friends now, but he still intimidates me. Part of it is his talent and output. Wiebe is one of the finest writers this country has ever produced." Paul Tiessen, who authored memoir and rereading of fiction, Rudy Wiebe's Of This Earth and Peace Shall Destroy Many, has written extensively about Wiebe's work. Paul's in-depth knowledge of Wiebe's work and the history of the Mennonite community and culture enriches his essays and offers the reader an insight into Wiebe's fiction and nonfiction. And so does Hugh Cook's comprehensive interview with Wiebe in 2016, first published in Image, a quarterly literary journal. A far-reaching discussion of Wiebe's background and his lifelong commitment to writing. Midway, I happily tucked in Olga Stein's insightful essay, The Wistful, Windy Madness of a Gift, Rudy Wiebe's book for young readers, which focuses on Chinook Christmas and Hidden Buffalo, Wiebe's two books for children. Stein, who holds a PhD in English and is a university and college instructor, presents a vivid depiction of each plot and its characters and entices the reader to examine yet another fascinating side of Wiebe's storytelling. In addition, Stein delineates certain main trajectories the books are part of, therefore offering valuable additional appreciation of Wiebe's writing. Wiebe's innovative vision and his distinctive voice have led to his works being widely studied, not only nationally, but also internationally. Milena Kaličanin, professor at the University of Niš in Serbia, in her eloquent essay, Fact versus Fiction in Rudy Wiebe's Where is the Voice Coming From?, explores one of the central themes that runs through and simultaneously binds much of Wiebe's fiction, that of turning historical elements into stories by questioning their accuracy as a way of, in Kaličanin's words, decoding the past. A selection of 3 book reviews offer valuable perspective into Wiebe's writing at different points in his career and into different genres. One is Maureen Scott Harris's piece, A Gift of Understanding, a perceptive discussion of Wiebe and Yvonne Johnson's collaboration on Johnson's biography, Stolen Life, The Journey of a Cree Woman. Harris explains that Johnson's biography teaches about humanity. Following this section are two articles. One is Catherine Govier's astute piece, A Gentle Eye from Afar, in which Govier fittingly sees Wiebe as an inspiration and a giver of insights into the shape of the world. The second is John Longhurst's intriguing Peace of Mind, which offers a window into Wiebe's perspective on his place as an author within his Mennonite community and his books about Indigenous peoples in Western Canada. I would also like to mention here that John has spearheaded this book launch, and I would like to say special thanks to John Longhurst for helping to bring us all together here today. George Melnyk's second essay featured in this collection, The Other Wiebe, Decoding a Novelist's Nonfiction, offers a cross-discussion of Wiebe's nonfictional work. This essay is of particular interest, for it makes a connection between Wiebe's fiction and nonfiction and the creative process involved. Wiebe's fiction and nonfiction, his essays and lectures attest to his emphasis on the importance of the milieu, which nourishes the creative process. At the conference on Mennonite writing at Goshen College in Indiana, Hildi Froese Tiessen, who has been Wiebe's longtime colleague and friend, offered valuable insight into the importance of a writer's life to the work created. Froese Tiessen's compelling account illustrates how the communities impact their writers and in turn how the writers and their stories impact the communities. It also affirms Wiebe's continuous involvement with the cultural and literary societies that shape the nature of his writing. One of the highlights of compiling and editing this essay collection is having the honor of interviewing Rudy Wiebe, this Canadian legend whose writing I've admired for decades. An exciting surprise and a bonus to our readers is Wiebe's inclusion of his 4 poems. Everything evocatively begins with Wiebe's friend Robert Crower's line, "I'm getting old now." The second poem, Hands in the Time of Pandemic, is a poignant reflection on the crisis caused by COVID-19. In response to my question concerning whether Wiebe continues to write during the pandemic, included are 2 poems, Departure Level and The Question, the author's profound contemplation on the current issues and our place in the world. I'm certain our readers will find the poems enlightening. Wiebe, the 89-year-old author, one of the most distinguished in Canada, explains, "I am fading into poetry. These are the first poems I published in over half a century." Rudy Wiebe's literary work raises him to the status of a Canadian literary icon whose fiction and nonfiction are seen as major contributions to Canadian literature and will continue to be enjoyed for generations to come. In closing, I would like to pass on the message Wiebe had given me at the Toronto International Festival of Authors in 2007. To all writers and aspiring writers, keep writing. Thank you. I will now present Wiebe's short bio. Rudy Wiebe, one of Canada's most accomplished and prominent authors, is a 2-time winner of the Governor-General's Award for Fiction for The Temptations of Big Bear and A Discovery of Strangers. Wiebe won the Charles Taylor Prize for his memoir Of This Earth, A Mennonite Boyhood in the Boreal Forest. He also received the Writers' Trust Nonfiction Prize for Stolen Life, The Journey of a Cree Woman, which he co-wrote with Yvonne Johnson. In 2007, he was presented with Leslie K. Tarr Award for his contribution to Christian literature. In 2009, he received Honorary Doctor of Letters from the University of Alberta. Wiebe is an officer of the Order of Canada. Wiebe's focus on his Mennonite heritage and Canadian Aboriginal past represent the main themes of his literary interest. His books have been translated into 9 European languages, as well as Hindi, Chinese, and Japanese. With the publication of his controversial breakout novel, Peace Shall Destroy Many, in 1962, Wiebe became the unwitting founder of a new era in Mennonite literature and has since been an advocate of prairie literary culture. His fiction often transcends culture and milieu and examines the struggles of societies and individuals. He has been called the first major Canadian writer to open his Mennonite community's experience to a wider audience. Excuse me. Wiebe has also been seen as the first major white Canadian writer to give voice to the First Peoples of Canada. His fiction reveals his sincere admiration of Indigenous peoples' culture and spirituality and its close links with nature and the natural world. Rudy Wiebe received his BA from the University of Alberta in 1956 and then studied literature and theology at the University of Tübingen in West Germany. In 1962, he graduated with a Bachelor of Theology from Mennonite Bible College in Winnipeg, now Canadian Mennonite University. From 1963 to 1967, Wiebe taught at a Mennonite college in Goshen, Indiana. He returned to the University of Alberta in 1967 and taught creative writing and English. He became immersed in Canadian literature. He wrote reviews and academic essays and mentored students, some of whom became accomplished Canadian writers, among them Marita van Herk, Myrna Kostas, and Catherine Gauvier, whose reflections on their work with Wiebe are included in this collection. He has also taught creative writing at colleges and universities in Canada, United States, and Germany. He has been Professor Emeritus at University of Alberta in Edmonton since 1992. Wiebe resides in Edmonton with his wife Tina and continues to write. Thank you. I shall pass the torch over to Arlen.
And before I invite Bianca to lead a conversation between Rudy Wiebe and Margaret Atwood, it is my honor to introduce Margaret Atwood to us all. Atwood's work has been published in more than 45 countries, and she is the author of more than 50 books of fiction, poetry, critical essays, and graphic novels. Burning Questions, a collection of essays from 2004 to 2021, was published in March 2022. Dearly, her first collection of poetry in over a decade, was published in November 2020. Her latest novel, The Testaments, is a co-winner of the 2019 Booker Prize. It is the long-awaited sequel to The Handmaid's Tale, now an award-winning television series. Her other works of fiction include Cat's Eye, finalist for the 1989 Booker Prize, Alias Grace, which won the Giller Prize in Canada and the Premio Mondello in Italy, The Blind Assassin, winner of the 2000 Booker Prize, the Mad Adam Trilogy, and Hagseed. She is the recipient of numerous awards, including the Peace Prize of the German Book Trade, the Franz Kafka International Literary Prize, the Penn Center USA Lifetime Achievement Award, and the Los Angeles Times Innovators Award. She lives in Toronto. Welcome. I invite Bianca to lead a conversation with Margaret and Rudy.
Thank you, Arlen. Two Canadian icons, Margaret Atwood and Rudy Wiebe. I will again say welcome. I am truly honored to have the opportunity to moderate this conversation.
Hi, Rudy.
I believe,
yeah, we've known each other for a long time. And I can't believe you're 89. How did that happen?
I kept pace with you, except I said.
Yes. So I'm going to take you back in time, Rudy.
Yes.
I'm going to take you back to the early 70s when we were starting the Writers' Union.
Yes, I remember that.
And we put on, in order to raise money for this endeavor, we put on a variety show called the Eclectic Typewriter Review. And it was a mixture of silly things and serious things. And you and Andrea Schroeder, were one of the serious things because you sang these beautiful, beautiful Mennonite hymns together on the stage.
I remember we sang Gott ist die Liebe on the stage, yes.
Yes. Do you remember singing that with Andy?
I absolutely do. Yes, I do.
Yes, I remember it very well, and you were one of the hits of the show. Everybody loved hearing those hymns. So that's my opener. Can you top this?
Well, I could top it because I met you in 1969, 68.
68.
68 when you came to live in Edmonton.
That's correct. And you told me to get a haircut.
Yes. And you told me not to eat when somebody's reading from the stage. Oh, we had a wonderful friendship all our life here together.
Well, I can't believe how long those lives have gone on. It just time whips by. So I'm going to ask you if you know somebody called Ron Tiessen.
Yes.
Ron Tiessen lives on Pelee Island.
Yes.
And he's Mennonite in background. He's met Miriam because we had Miriam on to Pelee for one of our birding events in the spring, and they went into their genealogy as one does to see if they were related. And as Miriam said, the Mennonite gene pool in Canada is quite shallow. So you're probably related to Ron Tiessen, who's written a very strange book called Menno in Athens.
In
Athens. Young Mennonite goes to Athens, Greece. That would probably be Ron because he became a classic scholar. Anyway, just letting you know that there's a little corner that you may not have discovered yet. And Ron has been a big collaborator with us on all sorts of things, including organic farming on Pelee and putting together community events on Pelee. So Mennonites are good for something, Rudy.
I did remember a couple of years ago when Tina and I were going to visit you at Graham on Pelee Island, and we couldn't make it because the ferry was closed down due to a storm. And we couldn't.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Well, that would probably have been in the middle of the teens of maybe around 2015 or so.
Mm-hmm.
So Graham was still with us at that point and still going strong at that moment.
Yes, he was.
So you probably remember him quite well because the two of you were active in the Writers' Union.
Well, for the formation of the Writers' Union, and when you started to talk to me once about the Poets League of Canada.
They had already started.
He predated us, and I said, "What are we going to do? Play for the Stanley Cup?"
Well, we didn't feel that they were quite as serious an organization as ours, because ours we were interested in the fact that nobody knew what was supposed to be in a book contract. And with the poets, it kind of didn't matter because they weren't going to make any money anyway.
Well, many of us, of course, were trying to make a living writing, right? And that really helped. Helped them enormously.
Yes, the prose writers, it was very, very helpful. And I think it was the first time any of us had met anybody else from other parts of Canada, because in those days there was no internet and there was there were no organizations, and we just didn't know each other.
That's right. I remember, but it seems to me that you and I, Peggy, were very fortunate, and our generation was the one that sort of got excited about Canadian writing after the centennial celebration of '67. It really took off.
That's true.
And I keep thinking that as a writer, I was particularly fortunate in that, being the son of a immigrant people, the first, the last of their children born here. So that was a very good thing that our generation had a very fortunate time, I think.
Well, we didn't know it at the time, Rudy. Or we didn't know it when the 60s began, because
Yes.
when the 60s began, we were told you can't be a writer in Canada. If you want to be a writer, you have to go to the States or England or France, but you just can't do it here. So I think it started to take off, as you say, in the middle of the 60s. And then after 67, people really were excited about it. And it became possible to publish novels in this country, which had been very difficult to do before because people said there isn't the audience.
If
You
you
know,
don't
we will
mind,
never, we can't do it.
right. And after about the 90s, the point was you had to go to Toronto to be a writer.
Well, that's obviously not true.
Well, anyway, I refused to go, but plenty of people did go to Toronto, thank God, and very, very good writers too. They were developed themselves.
Well, I don't think all of them went. Aretha didn't go.
No,
In fact, I can't think of anybody who did go. Who are these people?
mostly the East Coast,
East Coast.
not Westerners. No, they wouldn't go to Toronto.
No, particularly no. So the British Columbia has been very active. Alberta has been very active.
Yes.
Prairie literature, a very active segment. And you were first off the mark when it came to exploring Indigenous history, particularly Métis. So I think you were probably an inspiration to the wave of Indigenous writing that came beginning in the late 1980s.
Well, I was fortunate again in the sense that I had two natural subjects to write about: the immigrant experience in Canada and the West and North experience of people and the life of the Western and Northern people of Canada. There were two subjects that I could never write enough about, and it's lucky because it's difficult sometimes for a writer to have a subject, but you never seem to have suffered from that. You always had lots of things going for you. In all your 17 novels, at least, you've been
Well,
extremely prolific.
you haven't seen the failed ones, Rudy. In which I said, "What is this about, and why am I writing it?"
Yes,
Like that. Anyway, I think that's probably our time.
I
Is
think
that our time?
it's
He's
lovely,
not telling.
lovely to see.
It's great. If you'd like to continue, we all just love listening to your conversation. But this is, yes, it is 7 minutes. Would you like me to ask a question? You've covered all my questions. There's no point in asking a question.
Yeah, you ask a question. I'm sure you got some.
I could ask my last question. My last question was, how do you see Canadian literature evolving in the future, especially with artificial intelligence? And how do you see it impacting Canadian literature sort of going forward? Okay. I know it's a huge question, but it's
I can tell you right now that at this moment, we're not in any danger, Rudy, because artificial intelligence is a terrible writer.
Oh, that's good.
So we gave it a subject, Chat GB or whatever it is. We gave it a subject, which was write a story in the voice of Margaret Atwood set in Winnipeg. And it turned out this horrible thing called The Weeping Willows of Winnipeg, because you know how this works. It scrapes all the writing it can get and then composes something out of that. And I think it scraped my children's books and put it in with the other things. So it was about these very unhappy people in Winnipeg. Oh, yes, the other element was in a dystopia.
Oh, yeah.
And no comments, no fair saying Winnipeg is a dystopia. You're not allowed to say that. So it had all these extremely sad people in Winnipeg, who somehow just were unable to move out. Like, what if the dystopia was so bad? Why didn't they just leave? Apparently not. Anyway, it was awful. And we also asked it to write a poem, and that was even worse. So maybe it will improve. Apparently it's good at doing your travel plans for you. It can do that.
I don't think we don't have to worry about it yet, right?
We don't have to worry about it yet. No, and I'd probably never.
And at my age, I'm not worrying about that for sure.
Oh, I don't know, Rudy. Come on, hang in there. What is age? Yes. What are you writing?
What?
What are you writing?
I tried to write something while I was in the hospital. I tried to write down my notes, but I'm staggered by Parkinson's disease, so I can't write very well. And
You know, if you could get a tech aid, you can do voice to text on an iPad.
But I don't like machinery.
You don't like machinery. Okay, so what you need to do is get somebody to dress up like a tree, and they can work the machinery from inside the tree, and you won't even know it's a machine.
Right. I'll ask you. I'll phone you tomorrow, and we'll continue this conversation.
Yeah, you can get a coach. They'll help you with it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I did.
Thank you, Margaret. I always was a pleasure to be your friend.
Yes, and it's been a pleasure for me too, and I'm delighted to see you. And you're actually looking pretty well.
Well, thank you. You're looking very well with yourself, with a pacemaker and all, right?
Yeah, the whole machine. Say hi to Tina.
I will do that. I certainly will. She has good memories of you, especially the day in '85 when you visited us and stayed with us for several days. That was
I remember that. Yeah, that was great.
Yes.
Okay.
Blessings to you.
Well,
Bye.
thank you. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, Rudy. This was incredible. And we are all learning from you all the time now and always, and we will be. And the discussion will give us readers and writers a lot to think about. Your writing and your essays and lectures will continue to be appreciated and enjoyed for generations to come. Thank you both. This was wonderful. I'm grateful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for me as well. The Weeping Willows of Winnipeg. I won't forget that. I am pleased now to introduce Hildi Froese Tiessen, whose interest in Mennonite literature began decades ago when she co-directed a play with Rudy Wiebe and published an article on Wiebe's early Mennonite texts. During her tenure as professor and administrator at Conrad Grebel University College, University of Waterloo, she hosted innumerable readings, workshops, and lectures focused on Mennonites writing. In 1990, she curated the first conference on Mennonite writing and has played a planning role in 8 international Mennonite writing conferences since. She has published extensively on Mennonite literature, most recently on Mennonite writing selected essays by Hildi Froese Tiessen and edited by Robert Zacharias from York University. It's been published just a few weeks ago from CMU Press. Hildi, welcome.
Can you hear me now? Thank you. Great to see you, Rudy. And thank you, Bianca, and the whole gang over in Common Word who made this celebration possible. It's great. So my chapter in this book, entitled Between Memory and Longing, offers a commentary on Rudy Wiebe's 2001 novel, Sweeter Than All the World, especially on Wiebe's use in this historical fiction of other creative work reflective of Mennonite experience. The photographer Peter Gerard Rempel's photographs of Mennonites in Russia, 1890 to 1919. Rempel's photographs from over a century ago were published in 1921, 20 years before Wiebe's novel appeared. in a volume entitled Forever Summer, Forever Sunday. That title is taken from the photographer's daughter's exclamation when she was invited to reflect on her father's photographs. Bei uns, she said, war es immer Sommer, immer Sonntag. Where we lived in southern Ukraine a century ago, it was always summer, always Sunday, forever summer, forever Sunday. This phrase, forever summer, forever Sunday, has become a prominent trope in Mennonite literature, where it suggests a world beyond the grasp of Mennonites living in the 20th century, a world conjured up by Rempo's romantic, nostalgic photographs that evoke both memory and longing, what was and what might have been. In Sweeter Than All the World, Wiebe makes frequent and specific reference to several of Rempo's photographs as he probes the function, the impact for his characters and his readers alike of cultural icons such as these. The essay begins like this. Actual photographs, testimonies to historical circumstance, inform some of the narratives of Rudy Wiebe's Sweeter Than All the World. The following passage from the novel and the accompanying photograph, which I believe you can see on your screens, illustrate what I mean. This is a quotation from the novel. Father, show me a picture. Which one, sweetheart? You know, you know. You made me laugh, he says, laughing so hard I shook the camera under the hood. You and Greta Isaac were perfect, slender young men in trousers and tied cravats, flat-rimmed hats, pince-nez, and twirled mustaches. Superb, she in black stood leaning towards you in gray, seated in the round-back chair with your left leg perched at the ankle on your right knee, each of you with a long cigarette elegantly between your fingers, rolled paper, actually. Such beautiful young men. This essay investigates the relationship between literary fiction and the photograph. It probes the nature of collective memory. It suggests that sometimes cultural artifacts can engage our consciousness, invade our imagination, and lead us home. Members of my own generation of Russian Mennonites, children and grandchildren of 1920s German-speaking immigrants to Canada from the Mennonite colonies of southern Ukraine, our parents called it Russia, are cognizant of how far we have traveled from the richly layered religious and social ethos our parents occupied once, and how little material culture we can gather around us to give us a palpable sense of how they lived and who we are relative to their past, our heritage. We find ourselves pondering the limited material inheritances our forebears have passed on to us, primarily photographs, evocative and in some sense, presumably reliable. And we wonder whether these mementos, these minor monuments, can offer us any meaningful access to a cultural and spiritual heritage we have come to know only secondhand. In a very real sense, people of my generation are engaging in what Marianne Hirsch calls post-memory, a second-generation memory characterized by belatedness, secondariness. The personal memories of our parents and grandparents, are being crowded out, Hirsch would observe, by the cultural memories that have taken their place and now tend to dominate. Such cultural memories are both enlarged and subverted when they're extravagantly reconstructed by Mennonite writers of historical fiction like Sandra Birdsall and Rudy Wiebe. Cultural memory, Mika Ball has observed, can be located in literary texts because the latter are continuous with the communal fictionalizing, idealizing, monumentalizing impulses thriving in a conflicted culture. Historical fiction, informed by the photograph, like Rudy Wiebe's Sweeter Than All the World, has the capacity to posit at once the allure of imaginary wholeness that collective memory would promise, as well as the unreliability of all the material means that would seem poised to deliver that wholeness. That is because the photograph, like the historical fiction itself, is essentially an unstable artifact subject to diverse and contradictory interpretations. In fact, both literary fiction and the photograph offer incomplete and unstable renderings of what was and what might have been, of both memory and longing. The historical novelist gathers the fragments of what was in order to construct a rendering of what might have been, and he knows, as he does this, that any material residue of the past, including the photograph, can invoke and represent a forgetting as much as a remembering. Stop there.
Thank you, Hildi. I want to introduce George Melnyk, who is Professor Emeritus of Communication, Media, and Film at the University of Calgary. Welcome, George. He has authored or edited over 30 books, most of which are on Canadian topics. He was recognized in 2013 by the Writers Guild of Alberta's Golden Pen Award for Lifetime Achievement, and in 2023 by the Book Publishers Association of Alberta with a Lifetime Achievement Award for his contribution to Alberta book publishing. He has known Rudy Wiebe since the early 1970s and has followed Wiebe's literary career with interest and admiration. Wiebe contributed to Melnyk's New West Review and New West Press, and later became a prominent member of the New West Press editorial board. Melnyk's most recent book is The Transformative Cinema of Alejandro Jodorowsky from Bloomsbury 2023. Welcome, George.
I'm just waiting for the image to come up. Hello.
George, you're good to go.
I'm good to go. Sorry, I didn't see my image, so I didn't know I could.
Yep.
All right. Good evening, everyone. I would like to thank Bianca for inviting me to participate this evening and also being part of the book. My own history with Rudy goes back quite a ways to actually the early 1970s. And at that time, we had just moved to Edmonton, and I had been very impressed by Rudy's book, The Temptations of Big Bear, which had just come out. And I had interviewed him about it for this magazine called the Canadian Fiction Magazine. And the interview was published in 1974. So as you can see, we go back a long way. Then Rudy came into my life again when I wanted to start, when I started the New West Review, a monthly magazine, and he was a contributor to it, and a very, very important one. And then the magazine morphed into a book publishing house called New West Press, and Rudy played another role in that. He joined a group of academics who loaned me some money to be able to get those books going. And he also edited a collection of writings for the first New West Press book. It's called Getting Here, Stories Selected by Rudy Wiebe. And it came out in let me just check the date here, 1977, yeah. And what was interesting about that book, it was all the writers were women. So it was quite an exciting possibility. Here's the cover, if anyone could take a look at that. All right. So after that, Rudy again helped out with another one of my initiatives, which is called the New West Institute for Western Canadian Studies. And the Institute ran a forum on the arts in the summer. It just did it a few times. And Rudy kindly loaned his place at Strawberry Creek. I didn't have a cabin initially at that time, but we had writers and filmmakers and artists all come out, and we spent a weekend together talking about Western Canadian art. So, again, as I say, Rudy's and I go back a long way. My contribution to this anthology of writing is an essay on his nonfiction. So I'd like to read a little bit from that, okay? In this, I write about how I identify two significant characteristics of his fictional writing from the 1960s and 1970s that is carried over into his nonfiction. And I divided it into two. One is his Mennonite imagination, and the second is his pro-Indigenous imagination. Those are two elements that went into it. And then I talk about the importance of historical research that underpinned both his fiction and historical writing. So the fiction and nonfiction were both underpinned by historical research. There's an interesting part, a quote that Rudy did in an essay called On the Trail of Big Bear, in which he says he would not let facts dominate narrative the way a historian might. Instead, he presents the unwritten stories and undocumented personalities of his main characters in order to give emotional weight to history. As he says in the essay, he will not let facts become tyrants of stories. There's a close pollination coming from the novelist's fictional imagining and literary style. In his essay, Big Bear in a Strange Land, Wiebe's autobiographical account of his experience in New York, where he sees and touches Big Bear's medicine bundle in the vaults of the American Museum of Natural History, we find sentences reminiscent of similarly charged ones in his introduction to his nonfiction book about 1885. For example, he writes, and I quote, "I'm holding in my hands the sacred bundle of Big Bear. In the center of this bundle is that spirit gift which gave Big Bear his name and his wisdom and his power, which hung around his neck when he rode on a raid or danced his vows to the Thunderbird in the thirst dance." Okay? So the critics have written that about his second novel, Indigenous-themed novel, The Scorched Wood People, and concluded that, quote, "Wiebe has been able to blend both the earthiness and the spirituality of the Métis way of life into a powerful human document." Okay? So when Wiebe writes himself into the real-life story of his search for Big Bear's medicine bundle, he is able to blend his own earthiness, which is that Mennonite homesteader origin, and his Mennonite spirituality, Anabaptist Christianity, with the indigenous earthiness and the spirituality of an imagined and recreated Big Bear. Underlying this unity is Wiebe's distrust of dominant narratives and their biases because he comes from a minority, but whom the majority have written pejorative and inaccurate accounts. Because of this identification, he feels at home with the land-oriented spirituality of Indigenous peoples. Since Indigenous accounts of white recorded and described events are often oral, difficult to access, and in many cases undocumented, he enters Indigenous thought through the lens of his own viewpoints, using his own Anabaptist sentiments to get close to Aboriginal mythologies and ideologies, allows him to feel a kinship between Indigenous history and his own settler history. Wiebe's historical fiction and his nonfiction on Indigenous topics are attempts to redress or upend dominant narratives that ignored or sought to erase the valid experiences of silenced subjects. His nonfiction also serves to augment and clarify his fictional representations by discussing his motivation and foregrounding his engaged research approach. Thank you.
Thank you, George. I'm going to turn to Paul Tiessen. Paul is Professor Emeritus of English and Film Studies at Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo, Ontario. He has published widely on the work of Malcolm Lowry, as well as other modernist novelists with a special interest in their respective theories of film. He has published extensively too on Canadian writers in relation to film and to media. Other of his essay focus on Mennonite writers in Canada and the United States, primarily Rudy Wiebe. Currently, Tiessen is working on a book-length manuscript on the complicated relationships between Wiebe and his specifically Mennonite readers, with an emphasis on responses to Wiebe's first novel, Peace Shall Destroy Many. Welcome, Paul.
Great. Excuse me. Thank you, Arlen. And hi, everybody, especially Rudy. It's great to see you. My own relation to Rudy as Mennonite and me as Mennonite itself got started in 1967, but it's the year Rudy moved to Edmonton and I moved to Edmonton. And I won't say any more about that now. My essay in Bianca's exciting new volume is called Memoir and the Rereading of Fiction, Rudy Wiebe's Of This Earth and Peace Shall Destroy Many. This essay is part of my ongoing exploration of ways in which Wiebe's first novel, Peace Shall Destroy Many, established an ever-changing relationship between Wiebe and his Mennonite kin, who to this very day comprise a tiny but most lively subset of Wiebe's readers. As just about everyone knows, in 1962, the arrival of Peace Shall Destroy Many brought Wiebe into explosive contact with his Mennonite kin in Canada, especially many in Colville, Alberta, and Winnipeg. That moment of contact and the novel that triggered it gave Wiebe a new series of vistas to explore and re-explore. For example, he provided important autobiographical recollections of that intense encounter in 25th and 50th anniversary presentations that he gave, and that he subsequently published with the titles The Skull in the Swamp and Hold Your Peace. With his 1983 novel, My Lovely Enemy, Wiebe cast at least a sly glance at a new generation of that small group of Mennonite readers, 20 years after the initial ruckus. By this time, his Mennonite supporters were much better prepared to defend him, as I do describe in a recent paper, but only after waves of angry readers let it be known that they were not prepared to exactly get his often hilarious treatment of sex and religion. In his most recent novel, Come Back, Wiebe took his readers quite literally back into Peace Shall Destroy Many. For example, as he himself tells us in his author's note, the 75-year-old retired university prof who is the novel's protagonist is the 8-year-old boy of his first novel, Hal Weems. Additionally, we are invited to read Come Back autobiographically, as Robert Collison, for example, of the Toronto Star, accurately suggested about this emotionally harrowing tale. Indeed, with Come Back, Wiebe seems to introduce a kind of fusion between fact and fiction, the very thing he once urged us to resist in reading Peace Shall Destroy Many. But Peace Shall Destroy Many leads in other autobiographical directions too, as we discover in his beautiful memoir, Of This Earth, a Mennonite boyhood in the boreal forest. In this 2006 work, Wiebe found the bright side of the often dark and somber Peace Shall Destroy Many narrative. And I want to read just a few sample lines from my essay in Bianca's collection, Rudy Wiebe and his work. Rudy Wiebe essays on his work, sorry. The memoir provides us with ingredients and signposts that implicitly or explicitly direct us to his 1962 novel, the meanings of which Wiebe in essence urges us to understand anew. In the memoir's entering into conversation with the novel, the memoir gives us the sense that a vital, if barely noticeable subjectivity teems beneath the jagged surfaces of the sternly programmatic bulk and thrust of that austere early novel, a novel concerning the blind language of power and control in a small religious community in a remote corner of Saskatchewan. There, most of our attention is taken up by bitter and confrontational moments along its spiritually stark vistas, where cacophonous confusion and conflict of various adult voices prevail. With the memoir, even its epigraphs carry us to the rhythms and cadences of the idyllic world that tugs at our yearnings for innocence, a world suffused with the wonders of language and shaped by the sounds of the voice. Wiebe, as memoirist, revels in the texture and aura that is family and community and church produced with the lavish soundscape of their words and songs. He uses limpid layers of language to let words from the past sift through and mingle with his play of words in the present. Herr Gott, du bist unsere Zuflucht für und für, he writes in his prologue. Lord God, you have been our refuge in all generations. Words such as these from Psalm 90 he heard, read aloud and recited at home and in church before he could speak any language at all. Words were at the heart of the sensory net into which he fell as a child. And with the memoir, Wiebe provides a bold and dramatic invitation to rethink his controversial first novel with which he came to public prominence. The memoir is an invitation to re-enter and explore again certain lyrical layers of that novel, where plot and story and narrative trajectory seem to come to a stop, and where poetic utterance, an unbridled embrace of the joy of sensual existence within a natural idyll of sky and tree, wind and water, begin. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And finally, I'd love to it's my honor to introduce Scot Morison. Scott took writing workshops with Rudy Wiebe at the University of Alberta in the late 1970s and early 80s, and has an MFA in creative writing from UBC. He has published one novel, Noble Sanctuary, several short stories, and much nonfiction. For the past 30 years, he has worked primarily in film and television, writing drama and directing documentaries. He has taught creative writing and screenwriting at places like MacEwan University, the Banff Center for the Arts, and the Cinema Production Center in Ramallah, Palestine. He lives in Edmonton, Alberta. Hello, Scott.
Thank you, Arlen. Good evening, all, and especially nice to see you, Rudy. Thank you as well, Bianca, for the honor and privilege of being asked to participate tonight and to make a contribution to this wonderful book about Rudy and his writing. Rudy and I we live in the same cold northern city. So unlike many of the people tuning in tonight, I've had a chance to see Rudy many times over the years since I entered his introductory creative writing workshop at the U of A all those years ago. During our 45-year journey, he's gone from being a really tough teacher to a generous mentor and now a good friend. And I would add that last night my wife observed that Rudy is one of Canada's earliest truth and reconciliationists, and I think that's quite right too. George's list of Rudy's contributions to the work that he's done with New West reminded me of the things that Rudy has gifted me, very personal things, I guess. Letters of reference for all kinds of grants and jobs. He got me a gig writing a couple of commissioned pieces for a German magazine, including one about the Edmonton Oilers. They were both spiked, but Rudy insisted that I get paid fully anyway by the editors. And he also allowed me to take up some of his time in the making of a couple of documentary films. One, a profile of him and his work that was done for Bravo back in the days when Bravo actually did literary programming, and also a very personal film project, a triptych of 3 short films that reflected my thoughts about the Palestinian-Israeli crisis. And I've been thinking about that a lot lately, including an afternoon that I got to spend with Rudy in the Medicine Hills south of Edmonton for one of the little films in this triptych, where Rudy read from his novel, My Lovely Enemy, a passage about the Cree peace chief Muscapatoon. And I juxtaposed that in the film against the stories of a Palestinian man and an Israeli man who had both lost sons to that conflict. So I've been thinking about that a lot lately, obviously, with what's going on in Gaza. I think what I would like to do is just read a short little passage from the essay that I contributed, or the profile that I contributed to the book. There's a small, narrow seminar room on the 4th floor of the Humanities building with windows that overlook the North Saskatchewan River Valley, the high-level bridge, and the downtown Edmonton skyline. The view aside, there's nothing really remarkable about the room, but it's my favorite spot on campus. It was here that a gruff, sometimes cranky professor helped an unfocused and indifferent student uncover his true vocation. I met Rudy Wiebe in the summer of 1979. A zoology major who didn't really want to study science anymore, I'd found his introductory creative writing class while flipping through the thick University of Alberta calendar for half-interesting electives to round up my final year. The prerequisites for admission included a portfolio. So I wrote a couple of short stories and slipped them under Wiebe's desk in the mostly deserted Humanities building in late August. When Wiebe summoned me a few days later, he made it quite clear the samples I'd provided were execrable. Then he told me I could go ahead and register anyway, because in one of the stories, based on real events, I'd at least tried to write something I had a clue about, being young and stupid. I confess here I had read none of Wiebe's work when I signed up for that first class with him in 1979, but I slowly caught up and have now read most of his books. Getting through one of his novels requires concentration. He has an idiosyncratic attitude towards punctuation, and his syntax can be a challenge to follow. His entry in the Canadian Encyclopedia says this of his style: though sometimes ungainly, it frequently results in an eloquence that is both appropriate and evocative. To put it another way, he is a writer who expects his readers to do some work, but that work is richly rewarded. Wiebe could obviously write simpler, more straightforward stories, but he rejects the easy approach to his art. Writing is hard. So there's no point being half-assed about it, he says. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. And thank you to each of you for your contributions to the book and to your contributions this evening. Bianca, why don't you say your thank you?
I would like to refer to the dedication in essays. Rudy Wiebe, Essays on His Works, is dedicated to author Rudy Wiebe with admiration and gratitude for the power of his words, splendor of his images, and the innovative storytelling that helped shape Canadian literature in English from the 1960s to the present. Working with you, Rudy, has been an honor and one of the highlights of my career. I will always treasure the insights garnered from your books and your wise words. Thank you. It's been an incredible journey writing this book, and I'm truly, truly grateful for the opportunity to work with you. Thank you. And thanks to all the wonderful authors who contributed their pieces. We've gone back and forth with all the emails, but the book turned out pretty good, I think, I hope. And thank you all. Thank you, Hildi and Paul and Scott and George. Of course, I don't know where George is. And thank you, Paul Doerksen, for being here. And of course, thank you, Arlen, for doing all of this. I would also like to say special thanks to all the other contributing authors who are not here tonight for contributing their pieces. And it's been a pleasure to work with all of you. Thank you. I think perhaps Rudy Wiebe would like to say a few words now.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah. I just have a couple of words to say. I want to thank you all for your contribution. And I will leave you with these words from my good friend Robert Croce, from a complete poem of his in the Snowbird poems. The poem is this. "What do you do for a living?" I asked. "I remember," she replied. God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Rudy.
God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a full and rich evening, and I thank everyone again as well. And we're grateful you were all able to join us, and that Rudy, that your writing has left such an imprint and a legacy for us all. We are your indebted readers and learners. Thank you. This conversation has been recorded, available to view at commonword.ca, where you can also borrow or buy the book. Thanks all for participating, and have a good rest of the night. Bye now.
Thank you.